going on, everybody? Welcome back to High Floor Football. I'm your host, Sam Wagman, and with me, as always, is my co-host who's not wearing a Hawaiian shirt for the first time this spring, Jay Arsh. Jay, how you doing tonight, man? What's going on?
I'm doing well. I know I'm running out of Hawaiian shirts to wear. I have a lot of them, but I'm running out. We're a little bit closer to the NFL draft, so I'm doing well. I'm excited to have our guest on today too.
Yeah, absolutely. And speaking of our guest, he is my colleague over at Football Guys and the brand new head of video content over there, Alfredo Brown. My man, how you doing? My breakfast buddy.
Yeah, man, I'm good. Thank you for the shout out. And Jay, I gotta be real with you, man. There is no such thing as too many Hawaiian shirts. Keep wearing them every single day, even when you're not recording. Just wear them to sleep, wear them to breakfast. Every single day.
Believe me, I try.
I love it.
He does. He has an impressive display of Hawaiian shirts, and look, he's inspired me. So I promise that at some point I will go out and start buying some Hawaiians because I mean they just got style at this point.
It's the style, man. You got to keep up with the times, Wagon.
Yeah, absolutely. Hey, I mean, look, you are one of the kings of style yourself, so I always appreciate it. Though I hope you've recovered from the loss of all your bomber jackets.
Oh man, yeah. So like the quick story there is I left behind two of my jackets that I took with me to the Football Guys retreat in Las Vegas. I had them hanging in the closet, and I just left them. And then as I was getting ready to go back to Vegas for the FSGA conference, I'm like, oh, it's going to be cold. I need to get my jackets. And I started looking around in my closet. I'm like, no, everything's gone. And I told my wife that I left it in the hotel. And I was like, should I call and see if maybe like it was turned in? She was like, absolutely. That was not turned in. Someone stole your jacket. Like it was at a hotel in Vegas. Those were nice jackets. It's been like 2 months. They're gone. Good luck.
Yeah, absolutely. I definitely agree. Someone is looking very styling there. But look, guys, it is a great time. We have a few weeks before the NFL draft. But before we get into all that, I want to talk about our partners over at Underdog Fantasy because Underdog Fantasy is the best place to go draft. Look, we said this a little bit ago from the Football Guys channel. Best ball. A little bit better than mock drafts. And, not to fear, Alfredo, those mock drafts aren't going away. But best ball is absolutely the best way to get ahead of your league mates who are slacking off over the summer. Hop in a little private draft, a little cash draft, hop in one of the big tournaments they have over there. Best Ball Mania 4 is surely coming out now. Right now they have out the SuperFlex Big Board with the rookies and everything. So, I mean, a lot of great times over at Underdog, and you should definitely head on over to Football Guys and check out our brand new best ball guide that we just dropped today. This thing is absolutely dynamite, and I know Alfredo can attest to that. Our own Dave Kluge worked on it, James Brimacombe, Jeff Bell. All those guys worked really, really hard on that. So you guys should go right over and check that out. It is completely free. All you need to do is put in your email. So definitely wanted to mention that. But look, we got a long show ahead of us. We're breaking down the entire rookie wide receiver class. We're going to focus on, Alfredo's top guys as he helps us, figure out the guys that we should be targeting. But we're going to hit some of the fringe guys as well. So I want to dive right into it. And we're going to start with the guy who is all of our wide receiver ones at this point. And we have to assume that the NFL has him as their, consensus wide receiver one at this point. And that's Jackson Smith-Njigba. Now, he had an absolute stellar redshirt sophomore season at Ohio State, 1,600 yards, absolutely crushed it. And then early last year, just suffered a hamstring injury, wasn't really the same. And after that, his draft projections all wonky. So Alfredo, why don't you take us through JSN and why, despite, some injury concerns, some production concerns, why he should still be the wide receiver one in this year's draft?
Well, I think for the most part, I mean, you just kind of have to preface this when you're talking about anything involving this wide receiver class is that we've been spoiled for the last few years of just seeing star after star after star. So that when we get here to this class and we're like, yeah, Jackson Smith-Njigba is the wide receiver one, but he's not wrapped in the same wide receiver one wrapping paper that we've had all these years, where it's, the 6'4" guy or the guy that can run a blazing 4.3. And, he's not the same. But what he is he is a really smart route runner. He's really crafty. And I know everyone's saying the same things, right? Like, he's a good route runner. For him, it really showed when he went to the combine and was able to show off those agility numbers and that change of direction. And I remember the first time doing my film review on him, I'm saying, I wrote down, he's not that fast, but the dude's got hips like Shakira, man. Like, they don't lie. He's moving so quick. Like, he is able to turn direction and change up on a defender so quickly that it looked like one of these faster players, like a Tyreek Hill, Jalen Waddle type guy. I had to talk Dolphins as soon as I got into the show, of course. But it's funny because his change of direction in those short areas didn't match the long speed that we saw in film, a guy that's always getting caught from behind. But he did everything else really well. He was a smart route runner. And that's something that I'll look for, right? Is if a guy isn't going to win with his speed, he better be able to win with his smarts and with his route running. And he's one of those guys that was incredibly spatially aware. And that's a word you'll hear me say a lot when it comes to running backs and receivers and tight ends. Are they spatially aware? Can they look at everything like a chessboard? That's what Jackson Smith-Njigba does. And I think that a lot of people will look back to the crazy year that he had 2 years ago and the kind of production he put up while still playing with Garrett Wilson and Chris Olave. And, and really say, like, that's the thing we're all kind of holding on to, that's hopefully the production he can carry over to the next level. I don't know that too many are actually worried about the injury that he had last season. Who knows how bad it really was, but I think that any of those concerns, he's kind of quelled those for now.
Yeah, absolutely. I think for me, I look at the fact that he was able to produce so early in his college career, next to two absolute superstars. But by the way, both of which said that he was better than them. And, that's absolutely, obviously we have seen that backfire, the Elijah Moore, AJ Brown thing. But
Sam, I wonder how much of that just kind of becomes like conjecture, like how much
Sure.
because like it was the same thing when Devontae Smith and Jalen Waddle were coming out in the draft and they're, Mac Jones is definitely better than Tua Tagovailoa. It's like, no, they're helping their boy that's in the draft. Like that's
fair.
That's the protocol, man, is you do that. So Jackson Smith-Njigba could be the best receiver out of the three, but I think it's more along the lines of like, that's just the protocol. That's what you do at this point.
Yeah. Marvin Harrison Jr. might be as well, but Brian Hartline did make sure to have Marvin Harrison Jr., Jackson Smith-Njigba, and then the rest right below. And I'm sure he texted Chris Olave a little bit later saying, hey, man, no offense, these guys still got get drafted. So.
Right.
I mean, yeah, absolutely. But, look, I do think that there's been, some, lately we've had some people floating around here that have said, this is not the most high-end wide receiver class. I think we've definitely been a bit spoiled by these, pretty much superstar athletes that we've seen come out over the past handful of seasons. And, we kind of have to be a little bit more realistic from this class. Like you said, there's no superstar at the top of this draft. We just have a very smart and crafty route runner who can not only win from the slot, but he can also win outside if he needs to. And I think that's pretty much all that, we need to kind of give him that wide receiver one spot, coming up to the draft. Well, next up, sorry.
I was just going to say, I'm afraid to bring up the combine too, because Jackson Smith-Njigba's odds, actually, his betting odds changed significantly from pre-combine, post-combine. He was actually third to go first wide receiver off the board pre-combine, and now he's a significant favorite to be the first one taken in the draft. So that combine really did go a long way for him. And, some of the, agility metrics were the ones that really pushed him forward. I saw just one more piece on him, an interesting comp that Mike Renner was bringing up, because everybody talks about Cooper Kupp with Jackson Smith-Njigba, at least pretty often. And he brought up Julian Edelman and said that was kind of a player that he saw with JSN, which I thought was fun because you don't really hear Julian Edelman comped too often. He was kind of a unique player. He kind of won in his own way. But Renner bringing up Julian Edelman, I thought was a really interesting comp.
Yeah, absolutely there. I want to move on to your number 2 wide receiver and also Jay's number 2 wide receiver. But I'm still, I like Jordan Addison. I'm curious though. His combine wasn't great. So let's bring us up to speed on Jordan Addison. And, if we should worry, I tend to think no, but I want to hear both sides.
So I think that everyone that follows or covers the draft kind of says the same thing about the combine. is that you want to use that as a jumping off point to go back to the film and back to the analytics and say, is this something that he struggled with in college, right? And Jordan Addison, yeah, he didn't look all that fast on film. He didn't look like a 4.4 blazer. I don't think that's what any of us were expecting. And this is another guy, I know he didn't do it at the combine, but this is another guy that he wins with crafty route running. And I think that his route running style is a bit different than Jackson Smith and Jigba. JSN, he can win in tight spaces and change direction really fast. Jordan Addison isn't really a change of direction guy, but he's really smart when he runs his routes. And when I say that, I mean, he kind of like lulls the defender to sleep. He's really good at playing what I call peekaboo football, is like he kind of hides in the defender's blind spot. He'll sit in his back at the back numbers all the time until he's ready to make his move. And then what you end up seeing is, for a guy who's running a 4.5, he's going to end up having 10 to 12 yards of separation because he ran that route to perfection. And oftentimes he's playing the long game too. He'll go out and he'll run a similar route a couple times and kind of run it a certain way, and then get that defender to think that's how he's going to keep running it the rest of the game. And so all of a sudden he gets that crazy breakaway play. And we saw that at Pitt, at USC. And I also think that's something that really is something that I highly value, is players that can do this high level of production in multiple programs, because now it shows me he can pick up a playbook. He can work with a new coach, a new offensive coordinator, a new quarterback. And guess what? He's going to have to do it again for a third time in 3 years once he gets to the NFL. So this is a guy that can assimilate. He's a smart route runner. Does he have all the physical tools you look for? No, but I think where you're going to be able to draft him in the NFL draft, you're not expecting him to be a number one wide receiver, and that's okay.
I want to talk about the one comp that has, pretty much permeated the consensus at this point, and that's the Devontae Smith comp. Can you touch on that? Are the two similar? Is there someone else that we should be thinking of instead of Devontae Smith? I know it's the popular one, but people have said it's not necessarily the right one.
I wouldn't say that's the right one. I think that a lot of people are just comping that because, they were both skinny guys. It's a bad BMI, right? Like that was the easy thing to do. And you're going to see that happens with whether it's a skinny receiver, a short receiver. Like every receiver this year is Jahan Dotson or, Deontay Johnson or some other short receiver. And they just pick that because this class is filled with short kings, man. Sam, what's up?
Short kings, stand up.
But when it comes to Jordan Addison, I wouldn't comp him to Devontae Smith. I think Devontae is a bit more sudden. Yeah, he's a glider. But I think he's a bit more sudden. I think he's got a better top end speed. And then just the overall frame is way different despite the smaller BMI. I'd probably comp Jordan Addison similarly to Calvin Ridley, a guy who can be a downfield threat, but is not a burner. And he's just a smart route runner. And I think they have so many play style comparisons that just work when I look at them. I don't know that he'll ever be as good as Calvin Ridley, but I don't know that Calvin Ridley was ever really that number one receiver until Julio finally left. And that was, like 4 years into his career. And I could see something similar for Jordan Addison with that trajectory. So I think that's where I would lean with him.
Okay. Jay, you got anything to add there?
I totally agree. And I was actually kind of waiting for the Calvin Ridley thing to come out because that's also a player that I've thought is similar to him as well. I actually just bet on Jordan Addison yesterday to be the first wide receiver taken off the board just because I kind of liked the odds on it and not because I do think JSN still will be. He's the favorite. I wouldn't be surprised if he is. But I think of the guys after JSN, I think Addison actually has the best shot because I think that maybe the dynasty community, maybe the fantasy community is kind of knocking him a little bit more than the NFL community might actually be. Just to reference another, NFL draft analyst. But I mean, Daniel Jeremiah still has him as his first wide receiver on his top 50, and which you referenced as well, going back after the combine and watching the film. Daniel Jeremiah just said that recently. He said, I got to go back and watch all of Addison, watch all of Jackson Smith and Jigba, and really decide which one's going to be first on my board. But I think it has been interesting that he's kind of kept Addison there this whole time. And, especially in the dynasty community, the BMI you brought up, that's something that, we'll, nitpick and go after and just try and find anything. But yeah, to my point, I just kind of think that to Addison is not being knocked as much by the NFL as he maybe is by the fantasy community. So I'm interested to see where he ends up. He's also my wide receiver too. So
yeah, I do think it's very notable that Addison has been able to play with two extremely solid quarterbacks Say what you will about Kenny Pickett. He was the first quarterback off the board last year. And obviously Caleb Williams should be the number 1 overall pick next year. So I do think he has that to draw on. He has a ton of experience at that point. He's played on both coasts at this point. So I do think there's a lot to like about Addison. Some things I wonder if he's exclusively considered a slot guy to start out his career and then maybe makes a little bit of a transition to play, more of a Z role. I've thought of things like that. I do think that's probable given, at least until he bulks up a little bit, Alfredo.
Yeah, Sam, I think I sit with you on that, the Z role, because I think that's where he's going to be most effective is, a guy. So typically what you want to do is when you have a player that's either like a Jalen Hyatt that you want to get him up to full speed fast, or a guy that's maybe not as fast like a Jordan Addison, but he's a smart route runner. Let's put him in that Z position where we can kind of move him around the formation and get him moving pre-snap, or get him on some routes where he doesn't have the biggest, toughest corner head up face on him. And I know that's where Jordan Addison struggles, right? Is when he gets into press coverage. I think he had something like a 50% or sub 50% win rate when he was in press man coverage. And everything looked a lot worse for him there. So that's why I say he's going to be best off as a guy that's going to be the number 2 wide receiver on a team, probably that Z role where he's going to be able to move around the offense quite a bit. But he does have that versatility, Sam, like you mentioned. He can play outside, he can play inside, and he, outside of just the not having the great play strength or the great play speed, he doesn't have a lot of warts to his game. And so I can totally see like what Jay's talking about, where he very well could be the first wide receiver off the board. But I think we're all going to get a little bit disappointed at where these wide receivers go come draft time.
Yeah, and I was actually just talking to Jay about that a little bit earlier. The fact that we've been mock, and look, I'm not a huge mock drafter. I know Jay is. I've always viewed mock drafts as kind of our way of playing GM and where we want guys to go. It's very hard to get in the mindset of a GM and where guys will go. I think there's definitely a fine line, a fine difference, and I think look, it's not just us. We have guys like Brugler, Mel Kiper, Matt Miller. They've all been doing it for months. It's, we keep seeing all these guys at the back end of the first round. They very well could, but I do think, like we've been saying, in this class lacks that really high end talent where these guys are going to go. And I think this is a more defensive skill position strong draft than it is an offensive skill position, top end of the draft there. So I definitely agree with you, Alfredo, that we could be a little bit disappointed if we're expecting to see first round draft capital on some of these guys. But look, we've always, these guys are not immune. Talent will always show. And we've seen guys, that you have to be drafted in the first day or beginning of day 2 to be an absolute contributor is not a death knell at the wide receiver position like it used to be. So we've definitely seen guys from all over the place. And I think it's obviously not where running back is, where you can draft anybody and they'll be good. But I do think you can start to see value all over the draft at this point. So that honestly leads me perfectly into your wide receiver 3, because he's a guy that I'm just not sold on. And I can't tell you where I had him at the beginning of the process, back in February, March, because truthfully, he wasn't even on my radar until about, a month and a half ago. Zay Flowers is a guy I've heard comped to Tyler Lockett. I've heard him comped a bunch of different places, guys who are a little bit forgotten, but have extremely, smart mental skills and, route running strengths. So take me through Zay Flowers, because I'm not quite sold on him. I talked to our good friend Derek Brown, who absolutely loves him. Who tried to sell me on him, but I really want to get, a clear picture on Zay Flowers here.
Well, I'll say this, having him as my wide receiver 3 doesn't mean that I love him either. I just don't think there's a whole lot of great options in this wide receiver class. I think Zay Flowers absolutely comes with his warts. I think that those top 2 guys were the ones that had the least amount of issues. Whereas Zay Flowers, you mentioned a comp for him like Tyler Lockett. I comped him to a more athletic Deontay Johnson because,
Okay.
you know, it's a guy, smaller guys, you know, smaller frame, but he can play outside. He can play in the slot. Like, he's not one of those small guys that's going to be confined to the slot or be a gadget guy. Like, that's not going to be his role. And I think that's where some of the value comes in, is that you can use him anywhere in the field. You can throw him into the backfield when he starts moving. And I hate to even bring up the name, but when he starts moving, he does look a little bit like a Tyreek Hill in the sense of the athleticism and the explosive
Dolphins
ability.
fans.
No, and listen, like, I'm not comping him to Tyreek Hill. I'm not at all. I'm just saying, like, there are certain guys that once they start moving, their athleticism, man, it just hits different. You know, like when you watch Deebo Samuel carrying the ball, like, there's just players that they move differently. And Zay Flowers does that. And his ability to reverse field and literally beat an entire defense across the field once he's got the ball in his hands, I think that's going to be very sexy to a lot of these NFL GMs. And they're going to look at that and say, okay, despite his size, he was the #1 target for Boston College, and everyone knew that. And he still got force-fed the ball, and he still produced with one of the worst quarterbacks in the nation, and he was still able to do it. And then he comes out, he runs well at the combine, he looks smooth through all of his drills. This is a guy that we've actually been hearing he could be the first receiver off the board. Now, I don't know how much of that is just like, let's just move around the betting lines here, but like, I think that's a fun one to throw a little bit of money on as well. And this is a guy that I think he's got to clean up the drops that he has, but if there is an issue for a wide receiver to have, that's the easiest one to cure. If you're a bad route runner, you're going to be a bad route runner forever. If you're a bad athlete, you typically don't see guys get to the NFL and you say, man, he went from being a 4.7 to now he's a legit 4.4. He's really fast. You don't get taller, you don't get faster, and you typically don't become that much better of a route runner. But the hands can improve, and that's something that I do see for him. So if he gets into the right spot where he has the right coaching, I do see him as kind of a bit of a more athletic Deontay Johnson.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things I noted when I was looking at Zay Flowers, and it's something that, you know, kind of scares the bejesus out of me, is his arms. He does not have long arms. They're just 29.5 inches long. That's on the much smaller side. And you know, along with him being only 5'9", I worry that limits him to like a slot only role at times. I wonder if he's able to get back outside in the NFL like he was, because he played almost exclusively outside at Boston College. You know, how much of that was necessity, how much of that was him actually being able to, you know, because obviously it's a lot different in college, you know, for these guys. You're able to play outside if you're, you know, 5'7", 5'6", but you can't do that in the NFL. Every corner is, you know, that you won't be able to get off the line. So
you know, something that I want to point out, because like you mentioned it here, where you're worried about him having to go to the slot, we're hearing that about all these guys. Yeah. We're hearing that about every single one of them. Every guy we brought up so far, and the next one that we're going to bring up, all of them have concerns about being slot only. Who cares? How many of like the best receivers in the league have been slot guys? We're talking about Cooper Kupp. When Justin Jefferson came into the league, he was a slot only guy. Devontae Adams played some of his first years in the slot a lot. Like there's a whole list of guys that we talk about being slot only or slot usage heavy. Amon-Ra St. Brown is another one. Like there's production to be had there. I think it's a lot of these guys, and I hate to kind of use this cop out, but a lot of these guys, what's going to matter most is going to be the draft capital and the landing spot. And last year, I think we got lucky where we saw a bunch of talented players get good draft capital and relatively good landing spots. This year, man, I don't know. I don't think we get the same draft capital, but I think the landing spot could have, you know, players jumping from wide receiver 6 to wide receiver 3 and vice versa.
Yeah, and I kind of, you know, when you brought up the betting odds with Zay Flowers, I didn't laugh because I think it's, you know, untrue. I think it's actually possible. And I think that he's also, you know, kind of going back to what I said about Addison too, not to just kind of say the same thing, but I also think he's a guy that the NFL could just like a little bit more than, again, like dynasty players and fantasy players do. He's going to be 23 by the start of the season, which scares off a lot of people sometimes. You know, he's a little bit older prospect, and kind of alluding to what you had said earlier too, not comparing him stylistically to Jahan Dotson, but just kind of how Jahan Dotson was viewed last year. I mean, people that follow mock drafts, you know, often and follow a lot of the draft content. I mean, Jahan Dotson was somebody early on who a lot of the big names were saying he's going to go earlier than you think he is. And, you know, he was a little bit in the fantasy community thinking like, you know, he was a little bit older. He was an older breakout, same as Zay Flowers. And really, like, is he going to go ahead of this guy? Is he going to go ahead of this guy? Where did he go? He went 16th last year, I think, just off the top of my head. Mid first. but it was higher than, we thought. And that was a wide receiver heavy draft last year. But Zay Flowers kind of, again, not the stylistic comp, but more so just the view, the hype around him kind of reminds me of that, where a lot of the people in the know are kind of giving us little hints and nuggets that, the NFL really likes this guy. Like, he could go higher than you think. And we're trying to find reasons. You have him third wide receiver, which I think is pretty high. And like Sam said, Derek has him relatively high as well. So there are people that do have him higher up, but I think there are a lot of other people also kind of on the other side trying to find reasons not to like him as much, or trying to, find reasons to kind of cop outs, I guess I would say. So yeah, he's a very interesting player. He also put on, significant weight before he came to the combine. Then I heard I don't think he weighed in this pro day again, which is probably a smart move. He probably took it all back off right after that when he came in at like 183 or something like that. So yeah, he's a very interesting player. And yeah, I enjoyed those takes on him. Kind of the Deontay Johnson comp was interesting, because I thought you were going to go towards the one that I've heard people say they don't want to say, but they see, is Antonio Brown.
Antonio Brown.
And
yeah.
I thought that's where you were going to go with it, because I've heard so many people go like, I don't want to say it because it's so high level. It's such a high ceiling, but you kind of see it. And you went close to that with, Tyreek Hill as well. So he seems to have some pretty interesting comps.
He only did that because he's a Dolphin, Jay. Come on.
Yeah, I still haven't mentioned Tua. There's a lot of guys I have left to mention.
He's contractually obligated to mention at least 2 Dolphins players in every single podcast that he does.
Hey, we'll let him do it. You know that, Sam, we bring up plenty of Eagles all the time as well. So we'll give him that leeway to bring up Dolphins as much as he wants.
Yes, we do. But I want to bring up, a player that I find very intriguing as well. And like you said, another slot guy in Josh Downs. And I've seen some interesting things in Downs' game, but I want to hear first what led you to rank him in your top 5.
So honestly, after my initial film process, he was wide receiver 3 for me. Josh Downs is one of my favorite players in this draft because he does everything well. The problem is the only thing that he doesn't do well is be 6 feet tall and at least 185 pounds. Like he doesn't do those things, but everything else he does really well. He can run. He runs routes really well. He's got great hands for being this little dude that is so good at contested catches. He has the right mix of everything. And he is someone that I believe, yes, he will 100% be limited to the slot. That's fine. That's fine. That's exactly where I think he should be, because that's where he has his success. I think at one point I had said he's a bit like Elijah Moore. And I've heard a lot of people use that comp as well. Oh man, I had another good one and I forgot it. If it comes back to me, I'll bring it up. But I used that term earlier, spatial awareness. And I love that so much with Jackson Smith and Jigba's game. And I think that Josh Downs is right up there with him. I think that Josh Downs is right up there with him in terms of that spatial awareness and route running. And that's how he wins. That's how he wins, being this smaller guy going up against bigger safeties or bigger, faster corners. Everyone's going to be bigger than him in the defensive secondary, and he still wins all the time. And he's another guy, just like Zay Flowers, top option on the offense. Everyone knew that ball was going to him, and he's been able to succeed. And then very similar to Jordan Addison, multiple quarterbacks, making them both look good. Now, those quarterbacks are also pretty good themselves, but this is a guy that we've seen him do it year after year. The analytics for all the number crunching people, they look great. For all the film watchers, he looks really good. The only thing that was just disappointing was how much he weighed and how tall he measured in it. And that's it. But other than that, man, I really love Josh Downs. And had he been, a little bit heavier, a little bit taller, I'd probably have him ranked a bit higher.
Interesting. I mean, look, the only thing with Downs that I view as, truly a weakness, like you said, is the size. And I think, something that really interests me is the fact that he has near like plus 6 foot type contested catch ability. Like his vertical was, in the top 90 percentile. His broad jump was in the 97th percentile. I mean, kid can jump. Kid's got hops. So I mean, a lot of interest there. I tried to pull up Devontae Smith's RIS to see if there was any comparison there. As someone I remember who also was able to kind of build on being a very technical route runner who could jump as well. But then I remember Devontae Smith did pretty much zero combine and workouts because of all the stuff that he dealt with. But I think that's definitely, a possibility as well. Someone who's a very, very strong route runner. I might not have the ceiling that Devontae Smith has. Obviously he's a few inches shorter as well, but someone who has, kind of a similar game to me.
For
Sam,
criticizing, for criticizing Alfredo on bringing up Dolphins, you brought up Devontae Smith about 3 or 4 times already.
Yeah, man. At least I'm picking different players, dude.
You're just as guilty. Go ahead.
Everyone knows Devontae Smith is like my favorite player, so.
So something that kind of tells you exactly how the NFL views Josh Downs and his skill set, his profile is, I believe it was up until about like 2 days ago, he had no top 30 visits scheduled. And that's something that you always see with all the top prospects. Right. And it's because teams need to know more about these players. Teams know already what they need to know about Josh Downs. Everything there is on film. Everything was at the combine. We're good. We have no questions. It's the guys like Zay Flowers and Quentin Johnston and Jalen Hyatt that you really want to get into your building and see what they're like. How much do they know? How much of their athletic skill set actually applies to what they do on field? And I think everyone knows exactly what Josh Downs is. Do I think he'll creep into the first round? Probably not. I'd be really surprised if he did, just because that's a heavy draft capital to put on a slot receiver. But I think he'll be probably one of those early second to mid second guys that gets taken. And that seems to be a pretty good spot for receivers historically.
Yeah, that's a great point. I hadn't heard that angle about the visits, but that does make a lot of sense. And I really like that. I think, Sam, I thought you were going to mention it as well with his contested catches, and it's kind of alluding to our next guy as well. I think he was a more successful contested catcher than Quentin Johnston was, from what I've seen at about 4 inches smaller. So
Josh Downs had the best contested catch rate of any receiver in the class.
Wow. Yeah.
So there you go. For a guy who's only 5'9", 170, I mean, you don't get much better than that if you're hopeful about kind of what he can do downfield. If they can get him some downfield looks, I mean, it could be very interesting if he proves in the NFL that he has that kind of long speed to get down there. Yeah. Yep. But that does segue us right into our next guy, and a guy who's kind of definitely tumbled. Right. Early in the process, he was a lot of guys, wide receiver ones. He's definitely still some draft nicks, wide receiver one, just because we've said it this entire show, you cannot teach size and weight. Well, you can teach, you can change. You
can mess with the weight a little bit.
Yeah. You cannot change the height. I know because I've tried. So, but, Quentin Johnston is kind of that guy who really does profile, as one of the few wide receiver ones, alpha guys in this class. So tell us, Alfredo, why is he at 5 for you?
So all the things you said are absolutely true, Sam. Like, there's a sexiness to Quentin Johnston in that he is tall. He is relatively fast for his size. He's very fast. He's got some good run after catch ability. I don't know how well a lot of that stuff translates to the next level. He was able to get around a lot of poor tackling and arm tackles from small corners in the Big 12, which we know they're not known for their defense. And now he's going to go to the NFL, where he already struggled with contested catches and properly separating and running a full route tree and a lot of things that you want to see from a wide receiver that you're going to spend first round draft capital on. So yeah, I mean, being the tallest guy in the short kid class doesn't really appeal to me this year. Like, the only reason he stands out, if this was last year, I think he'd be ranked behind guys like Christian Watson that were going in the second round. And I think that's about that's pretty close to where his value is this year. And I think that he might still go in the first round just because it's a weak wide receiver class, but it would not surprise me to see him fall to day 2. I think that a lot of what's going to happen when he gets to the next level, it's going to be coaching. It's going to take patience. The situation's going to matter a lot. So much of what he does reminds me of Treylon Burks last year, where it was the same thing. Everyone was super into him because he was big, he was fast, he had all the sexy traits that we love. He can run well after the catch. Cool. Treylon Burks knew 3 routes, and Quentin Johnston is essentially the same thing. And I got killed for having Treylon as my wide receiver 5 last year. And we've seen how many other wide receivers were better than him. And I see it very similarly here with Quentin Johnston. And listen, he might prove me wrong, but I want to see him be a bit more like T. Higgins. And that's what I've said. Like with that size, I want him to be that jump ball guy. I want him to be someone that you can rely on when your quarterback's in trouble or you're in the red zone. And to me, he plays a bit more like he's like a Terrace Marshall, like a guy who wants to try to stretch the field and be able to run smoothly and not take a lot of contact. And that stuff is not going to work if you're being drafted to be the guy, he's one of the few X receivers in this class, but I'm pretty sure he's going to have to be used as a Z receiver because he hasn't done well with content. He hasn't done well contact, and contested catches. So like these are things that it's going to take patience. It's going to take coaching. If he's able to put it all together, I'm not saying he can't succeed, but it's going to take a lot. And I personally, if I'm a dynasty manager, I don't want to have to bet on that volatility. If I'm in a really good situation, I'm saying, hey, you know what? If he's really good next year, cool. That helps my championship team already just stay at the top. But I'm not trying to take that kind of risk with, let's say, a top 5 pick in my dynasty drafts.
Yeah, I appreciate that dynasty take on it because I think that's something that we don't get to dive into a lot when we're looking at this more from a football angle. But I think it's definitely advantageous to look at this, even if you don't play fantasy, as a dynasty fantasy manager, and say, where am I going to be with this guy 3 years down the road? Is there a good chance he pans out? Is there a good chance he learns how to run an NFL route tree? How's he going to do with run blocking? All of that, X factor stuff that kind of doesn't show up on the stat sheet, when we pull up stats on ESPN or our favorite stats site. Definitely, and
footballguys.com.
Absolutely the best site in the world. His shuttle score, not great. His 3-cone score, borderline terrible. I mean, so, sure, the height, the weight, the vertical, the broad, all look great. But there are lots of red flags underneath the surface with Quentin Johnston. So I definitely see that. Jay, you got anything to add before we move on?
Yeah, I mean, as you know, Sam, I'm a big-time dynasty player, and I really could relate to what Alfredo was just saying because, I also said in the beginning, too, Jordan Addison is my second wide receiver as well. And as much as we might be worried about his ceiling, I'm not really worried about his floor and what Jordan Addison will be able to do, at a minimum, I guess I would say, in the NFL. I feel pretty comfortable with him. And in dynasty right now, I mean, Quentin Johnston has, in dynasty rookie mock drafts, things like that. I mean, he has been dropping. He's getting there to like the 110, 112 range. But for me, it kind of feels like a tier break after that 1-7, with the 3 quarterbacks going a little bit higher, and then Addison, JSN, and Gibbs. After that 107, it starts to get a little murky. And as much as Quentin Johnston, does have that high-end potential, he has the size, the things that, get us excited sometimes. I mean, I think there's a lot of risk baked into that as well. I don't mean to put you on the spot, but I would ask, do you have, a spot that you think would be best for him, or a scheme that you think would be best for him in the NFL, a team that you've kind of, thought that this would make me feel a little bit more comfortable if he went here, something like that?
Man, okay. So yeah, you did put me on the spot a little bit here. Let me take a look at this NFL draft order, because if he's going to go somewhere, I think it's likely that he goes towards the end of the first round.
Sure. I was thinking maybe the Giants potentially. Would that be a team that you would...
that's a team I wouldn't be super excited about it because it's still Daniel Jones, right? And I don't know that he would be the first or second target on that team, but there's definitely an opening for him there. I think that a lot of us were potentially excited about Baltimore for a little bit, but a team that I'm looking at right now here on this list, Minnesota. Yeah. Minnesota makes a ton of sense. They have a huge opening there at the wide receiver 2 spot, and Justin Jefferson on the other side, TJ Hawkinson in the middle, and then whatever, bevy of running backs they have back there in a good offense, an offense that was pretty good last year. So if he ends up somewhere like that, I'd hate to see him end up in Buffalo. I know that Josh Allen has the cannon of the arm, but we've played the Gabe Davis game every single year, and this is actually, I think, pretty similar. But yeah, Minnesota is one of those spots that I'd love that if that happens. That's great. Maybe Kansas City if that happens as well. Those are the only other spots, but I mean, you could say that for any receiver if they ended up in Minnesota or Kansas City. So that kind of shows you where my head is at on Quentin Johnston. But I think there is still that possibility he can absolutely turn around with proper coaching, proper time. We said a lot of the same things last year about Christian Watson, and now he is beloved in dynasty circles. So we could be all in love with Quentin Johnston next year.
Yeah. And the only problem is we've also been saying the same thing about Terrace Marshall for 2 years now. So, you know, we have both the high end and the possibly very, very low end there. So definitely a ton of reasons why he is, you know, at the bottom of some people's top fives and potentially out of their top five altogether. Though I do think, you know, there's only a few people in this class that could really crack the top five without Quentin Johnston there. But I love Marvin Mims. He's become one of my favorite players to target in the early third, late second round of Dynasty rookie mocks. And I know that you loved him for a while at this point. So tell us all about Marvin Mims. And I'm just going to close my eyes and let you talk because I love
you. Man. Yeah. I'm going to take you on a journey here, Sam. Okay. Because yes, I have been in on and I know everyone says that, oh, I had my guy and I was in, but like I loved these short kings in this draft this year. And Marvin Mims was one of those guys that the second I took a look at the numbers and I put on the film and I was like, yo, this all matches up. This guy's pretty good. Now I'll say it right out the gate. He doesn't run a full route tree right now. You want to see him do a bit more, but that's fine because where he's going to go in the NFL draft and where he's probably going to go in your rookie draft, that's a risk I'm willing to take because he is such an explosive player. I know that. So like a guy that we're going to talk about in a little bit, Jalen Hyatt, Marvin Mims does everything that Jalen Hyatt does, and he does it better. And he did it more consistently throughout college. Once again, multiple quarterbacks, multiple coaches at Oklahoma, and he's done it at every single level. Sam, I'm going to take you on a journey here. You ready? Okay. Marvin Mims, Texas high school football. He set the state record in career receiving yards throughout his tenure there in high school. Let's take that even a step further. He has the receiving yards record as a high school senior for the most ever in the history of high school football. Okay, 2,629 receiving yards. I'm reading the notes right here, man, because Marvin Mims absolutely dominated as the most prolific wide receiver in high school football history. Like that's crazy. Then to go and break out as a true freshman in Oklahoma and lead Oklahoma in receiving every single year of his career, a team that is known for having a good offense all the time. And this guy was able to come in as an 18-year-old and do that. Now we start to get into this draft process. He runs a 4.38 at the combine, 85th percentile jumps, super explosive, all the same things that we saw in film, right? Now, the only things that we have are those question marks. He's not very big, but that's fine. Like that didn't hurt him. Big 12 defenses, they suck. Yeah, we knew that already. He needs to have a little bit more versatility to his game. Something that I want to see him do is to be able to throttle down on his routes. This is something that I think more and more people are getting aware of, where we always talk about explosiveness and the ability to get to top speed. Well, you also need that ability to slow down like us normal people and just, you know, be kind of slow, right? Because that allows you to get that change of direction a bit better. That's what I want to see him do, is be able to win on those intermediate routes. And he's not quite there yet. But let's say Marvin Mims ends up on a team like the Los Angeles Chargers, where he's just going to be asked to stretch the field and kind of work out of, you know, he can work out of the outside with Mike Williams on one end, Keenan Allen in the slot, and Marvin Mims being able just to take off downfield and you know, work those deep routes against safeties. I think he can have a really good future in the NFL. I don't know that he'll ever be that true wide receiver one that we want to see, but I think for fantasy purposes, he'll be one of those fun wide receiver threes that we like. I think the comps I gave him were a little bit higher end than that, but he's a mix to me of T.Y. Hilton. I had to get an FIU Golden Panther in there, and a little bit of Darnell Mooney. That's what I see a lot of when I watch Marvin Mims, is Darnell Mooney, because of that deep field ability that he has.
Yeah, and you know, something that definitely spoke to me with Mims is the fact that I think he'll be an extremely good best ball option if he lands in a advantageous program. Again, the Chargers would be a absolute dream spot for him. Again, Minnesota, absolute dream spot for him. We don't even have to mention Kansas City. But I do think if Buffalo managed to land him as well, that would be a really good spot for him there. So, you know, look, I don't think Mims has a ton of issues. You know, certainly, you know, we have to tackle the Big 12 thing. There's just been too many question marks from that conference. I'm still scarred over Jalen Reagor. I likely never will recover. But
Jalen Reagor, Josh Doxson, now Quentin Johnston.
Those damn TCU Horned Frogs.
That's what it is, man.
What are you doing to me? What are you doing to me? But Absolutely. Jay, you got anything before we go to
No,
go to these Tennessee Volunteers?
no, I enjoyed that. I mean, Marvin Mims has been climbing up rookie boards for sure in Dynasty at least. He was kind of going in that mid third, I feel like, and now he's going kind of that late second. Sometimes I'm seeing him, and he's really climbed up. Also, I think it's impressive that he had this big season last season, his biggest at least, with coaching change, a quarterback change, a lot of things changing around him. And he was able to kind of, I didn't know all those high school stats too. That was just, that was really impressive. That was like, the stat, Luke Kennard is like the Ohio leading scorer over LeBron James high school basketball, which is like just a wild stat. And that was like one of those when you just said when you kept saying the Marvin Mims stat, I was like, and then you were like, of all of high school, of all of Texas. I was like, oh my God, it is, very high end. So it's really impressive.
Yeah, I mean, some of these guys, a lot of those guys just, are one trick ponies and don't manage to stay on that level all the way through, all the tiers. But I mean, the ones that do, we see it, and obviously there's something special about Marvin Mims. He's seemed to rise up some draft boards as well. So maybe he gets some nice day 2 draft capital and really sneaks into our hearts. But the good news is the three of us will already be well ahead of everyone. So I want to move on here, and this is interesting. There is one name that we have not mentioned that is in a lot of people's, not only their top 5, but in the first round of people's boards. But before we get to him, you have a guy in front of him from the same team, and that is Cedric Tillman, who is pretty much the other X-receiver in this draft. Came out of Tennessee and was honestly a very good player, good enough that I knew who he was because I've bet on props from him before. So, but tell us all about Cedric Tillman.
So that's funny that you mentioned it. Like, yeah, Cedric Tillman is seen as the other Tennessee receiver, right? I think he's better. I think he's better than Jalen Hyatt, and I kind of, it sucks that he's being seen as the other receiver there. And I recorded with Matt Harmon earlier this week for my show, The Pretend GM, on the Football Guys YouTube channel, and he was saying the exact same things. And he and I were just in lockstep on this, that we like Cedric Tillman. That. Yeah, I mean, we really like Cedric Tillman. What I hate is that he was injured all throughout this last season. So we really didn't see the best version of him. And that kind of paved the way for Jalen Hyatt to become the guy in that, as Harmon likes to say, that Mickey Mouse Looney Tunes offense over there for Tennessee. But Cedric Tillman was the guy that would actually line up on the line of scrimmage. He would play as a true X receiver. He would take on the best corner from the opposing defense. He would be able to work through man press coverage. He would be able to work through zone coverage. He was able to hit all 3 parts of the field, downfield, despite not being the fastest guy. He ran a 4.5 at the combine, which it's not slow, but it's not a burner either. And so what I think is when you look at a guy like him who has that classic X receiver mold, I like that he actually plays that way. There's very few big-bodied guys in this class that can win uncontested catches. He does that. If Quentin Johnson was like Cedric Tillman with his body, his speed, all that stuff, yes, Quentin Johnson would be ranked way higher. I don't know that Cedric Tillman, once again, I don't think he's going to have that crazy explosiveness or that athleticism to just beat every single player in the NFL, but he's crafty enough to win in different ways. When I look at him, I see a bit of, I mixed him with 2 players here, Devontae Parker and Nico Collins. Mm-hmm. And those are guys that I think it fits really well for Cedric Tillman. He may not ever be one of those top 24 guys or a big like best ball guy that you really want, but he's going to be one of those guys that's going to be on your team for quite a while. He's, I think, the safer play, and he could definitely evolve into the other comp I've seen for him is Michael Pittman. And I think that's a great ceiling for him. If he can hit that, obviously we're all super excited. Michael Pittman's great.
Absolutely.
But I think it's going to take a bit more. I think Pittman was the better prospect over Tillman. He's going to have to learn a bit more coming out of that Tennessee offense. And I think that's something that plagues both these guys, Tillman and Hyatt.
Yep, absolutely. I mean, I think the thing for me with Tillman is that you just had Jalen Hyatt, who formed like just this electric combination with Hendon Hooker, until Hooker went down, and, Hyatt obviously won the Biletnikoff. And so it's so tough to overcome public perception. in this day and age. And, Cedric Tillman is definitely a victim of that, because there were times that he did look like the better wide receiver and obviously didn't get the chance to show his due, like you said, due to all the injuries last year. But I do think Tillman is going to be a very interesting guy. I've taken him a couple spots at the end of best ball drafts. He's kind of a guy that could be interesting as like a red zone weapon to me, because he's just has that massive catch radius. It'll be really interesting to see if the fact that he played a limited route tree in college, if, is he a candidate for someone that they line up in the red zone as like a goal line fade option early on in his career? Maybe he's a guy that has like 8-9 touchdowns that mostly come from the red zone in his first season. So I think there's options for Cedric Tillman. I do think he's a very landing spot dependent guy who needs to be schemed the right way. But Jay?
Yeah, no, I mean, I really liked that as well. I mean, I've been kind of trying to wrestle this, Cedric Tillman, Jalen Hyatt thing as well, because people have been kind of back and forth on them. This last season kind of reminds me of two, high level guys. But when Jalen Waddle and Devontae Smith were coming out, Jalen Waddle got hurt. Devontae Smith
did it, a dolphin and an eagle. Nice job.
Nice blending it. There you go, dude.
But Devontae, a great player. We all knew that. But I mean, the numbers that he put up that season were just nutty. And so many people kept going back to, well, if Jalen Waddle didn't get hurt, some of that would have been split. He wouldn't have maybe scored 20 plus touchdowns or whatever he did, won the Heisman. Two great players. I don't know that Tillman and Hyatt will necessarily be as high level players as them, but it's similar to that, where you just the recency bias of it. You saw Jalen Hyatt score 5 touchdowns against Alabama. You saw him have this, huge season, winning all the awards, all that kind of stuff. And so I really do enjoy kind of going back to this and, hearing, praise of Cedric Tillman as well, because who knows what he would have done. And like you said, in the Mickey Mouse offense, I mean, they were doing some crazy stuff out there. Who knows what the two of them would have done together instead of, Jalen Hyatt kind of stealing that shine. So, yeah, I really liked that. And I like the comps, too, because those are like, I like when there are more realistic comps like that, when they aren't just the high-end player. When it's like he could be a Devontae Parker and people are like, oh, that sucks. And it's like, well, Devontae Parker's actually been pretty good. He's had a pretty good NFL career.
It's the most annoying thing that everyone's like, oh yeah, this receiver that's good at route running but not really fast.
Former Dolphin.
He can be Michael Thomas. And it's just like, no, he's not likely going to be the wide receiver one multiple years in a row.
Yeah.
Like, let's get something realistic there. And those were guys that I saw. It's like, yeah, that works, because it was the same route running thing. It was the same. They're a little bit touchdown dependent in the next level. They're not going to be great separators. That's what Tillman is. And, he'll be able to win with those contested catches like those guys.
Yeah, absolutely. So now we get to kind of people, have referred to him as the crown jewel. Some people are saying, public perception has driven him to a point where he doesn't deserve to be. And I think you have definitely shown by this ranking that you fall into that latter half. So Jalen Hyatt, what do we need to know about Jalen Hyatt at this point?
Well, one, I think he gets both. He gets too much of both sides. He gets way too much love and way too much hate. Okay. Like, you can't fault the guy for succeeding in the surroundings he was given. That was his ecosystem, and he flourished. But at the same time, he flourished in that ecosystem. And you can't look at all these numbers. It didn't hit me. Like, I had looked at all the analytics and I had looked at the film, and it really didn't hit me until someone mentioned it the other day. And I'll read them off to you as his big games that were all like, wow, he was great. Akron, Tennessee Martin, Kentucky, and Missouri. And then he has the absolute clinic, as it was told to me, against Alabama. And that's what I was told, was go and put on the Alabama film, because he put on an absolute clinic with 5 touchdowns. And that's what everyone is going to remember. That was the first game I watched on Jalen Hyatt. And I wasn't blown away like some people were. There are things that he does that you only see in a high school offense, where he was always on the move. There was never a play where he was lined up on the line and actually just taking off from the line. He was always on the move, because Tennessee wanted to take his speed and get him in motion. So that he was kind of like how I'm going to do it again, Dolphins, kind of like how Mike McDaniel was moving his receivers all throughout the year. And so there's absolutely a place for that in the NFL. Right. But the thing that concerned me the most was having, I believe it was something over 50% of his snaps came out of that stack formation, where he would literally hide behind another receiver, use them as a shield so that he could break out free without a corner having to be able to touch him. And you go and you look at all these touchdowns he had, there was never anyone around him. And so that's a guy that we talk about, like Josh Downs not having to go to any top 30 visits. If you're interested in a wide receiver and you're curious about Jalen Hyatt, I think he might be one of those guys that has the most top 30 visits of any receiver in this class, because teams need to figure out what can he do. He's not a total lost cause. He can run a couple of different routes, and he's good on some of those, comebacks and curls, and he can decelerate with his speed, and he obviously has the speed to hit downfield. He's got good enough hands. But man, like, we just never saw him do anything that truly translates to the next level. And I have a really hard time saying, well, yeah, that's obviously going to be good at the next level, because we never saw it. So it's one of those things, man. Maybe I'm harping on it too much, but I hate that we didn't get to see him do anything that translates over to the NFL.
Yeah, I do think that there's a lot of smoke around what you've said, and honestly, it's not something I've heard. But now that you say it, I mean, if you're just in so much motion, they're just going to throw a cornerback. They're just going to try and jam you at the line, and you can't get away with that every single down in the NFL. Right. So the question, does he become scheme dependent? His route tree again. The Tennessee thing, this is not a school that is, well known for producing all the wide receivers to the best of my remembrance. But look, both him and Tillman have kind of limited route trees as well. They didn't really have to do a crazy amount of things to get open. They were just schemed open. Heupel is very good at that. So, and again, he only has the one season putting up elite numbers. It coincides with Hendon Hooker taking a absolute massive step. So we'll have to see whether that is, whether NFL, and I think you'll see something. I do think you'll see a correlation between where Hendon Hooker goes and where Jalen Hyatt goes, in that teams will look at them as being, connected by that the thread that basically says, one was the cause of the other, and the other was the cause of that, the effect of that one. So I think that'll be a really good, interesting point. I don't think Jalen Hyatt will go in the first round. But it will be interesting to me if Hendon Hooker goes, in the back end of the first round. Does the team force a quarterback? If someone thinks that Hendon Hooker, actually is a very good quarterback, there is, a reasonable thought that Jalen Hyatt should follow him in the early second, given that. But again, it's very, very dependent. And I do think he's kind of that guy who's scheme dependent at the end of the day. So, all right. So we got one more guy in your top 10, and really not a guy that I have done, honestly, really any film evaluation on. So I was really interested to hear Rashee Rice, because I have a couple other guys who would be kind of in my area, and we'll have a few minutes at the end of this to kind of talk about that. But break down Rashee Rice for us.
So I have Rashee Rice at number 10. I have Jaden Reed at number 9.
I missed Reed. Sorry. Go.
Do you want me to do?
Go with Reed first. Sorry.
Okay. Yeah.
I completely misread.
No, you're good. You're good. So, with Jaden Reed, the reason I love him is once again, this is a guy who was able to do this at multiple programs. He started out at Western Michigan. He was the team's leading receiver as a freshman, and he outproduced, not that he became anything in the NFL, but he was a good prospect, D. Eskridge, who was a junior at that time. Yep. And Jaden Reed was a freshman. D. Eskridge eventually became a second-round pick, and we're talking about a guy that outproduced him pretty easily. And JJ Zacharyson has even brought this up, that, looking at Sky Moore, who eventually came in and took over that Jaden Reed role, he didn't quite produce as well as Jaden Reed did in that offense. So these are guys that both got round 2 capital that Jaden Reed was better than in that program. And now we saw him go to the Senior Bowl and finally have, quarterbacks that, even those quarterbacks at the Senior Bowl weren't very good, but it was better than what he had at Michigan State. Very similar to what we saw with Zay Flowers. And he went out there, crushed it. And I know that a lot of those drills are meant for wide receivers to win, but Jaden Reed looked really, really good. And he was able to show his ability to separate. What I love is he's got that versatility to play out wide or in the slot. And this was another surprising thing. Short Kings, raise up, man. He was number 2 in the draft class in contested catch rate behind Josh Downs. So another guy, he was a victim of his circumstance, but he played well wherever he was. And I think that he's one of those guys that his skill set can translate well to the next level.
Yeah, for me, I got to watch a little bit of Reed games, live games. Not this year, not this past year, but the year before, because I had a couple shares of Jalen Naylor in college fantasy football leagues, and Jalen Naylor kind of worked behind Jaden Reed a little bit. I got to see Reed have some absolutely massive games where he would just absolutely take off with the ball. And it really showed me that he has that long speed to really be a difference maker in the NFL. And it's interesting to me because we've seen him put up that speed, and I'm looking to see what he ran. He ran a 4.45 in the 40. And I mean, to me, we could see him play very, very well at the Z position. And I do think that he's not just I don't think he's all a field stretcher. I think he can definitely be a guy who can move the chains as well and be kind of that possession receiver. So that really interests me. And I do think people have underrated him a fair bit. So I'm happy to see him at your number 9 spot there.
Yeah. JJ Zachariason really screwed all of us dynasty players with his take on Jaden Reed too. Ever since he put out that piece on Jaden Reed, his ADP's climbed so much in these rookie drafts, I feel like. So I'm glad you brought it up. I said the same thing to Sam like pretty recently. I said, JJ really like messed us up on this guy, because now every rookie mock you're in, every rookie draft you're in, he's going a little bit higher and a little bit higher as ADP's climbing. So yeah, and I really think he's an interesting player. What you said, going from multiple schools, having success multiple places, is really interesting. And I kind of, where do you think he would go in the draft? Do you think he's going to go on day 2, or do you think he's going to fall a little bit?
I think he has a shot to go on day 2, probably mid to late day 3. If we end up with the same habits that we've had in the past years, where wide receivers were getting taken early and often, then yes. But all the buzz now is that we might see wide receivers go a little bit later than we expect, because there's so many good running backs, there's so many good tight ends, and there's so many good offensive linemen and everything else. So if he sneaks in around into day 2, I wouldn't be surprised. But I think it's probably more likely he ends up at round 4, beginning of day 3.
Interesting there. Okay. All right. So now let's get into Rashee Rice, who comes from the high-flying SMU program over there. So again, not a player I know much about. I'm not sure on Jay's level either, but let's hear it.
Yeah, so this is a guy that I think it was interesting, because like when I first started jumping to the rookies, especially the wide receiver position, I was hearing so much about Quentin Johnston is the number 1, and then Rashee Rice is like number 3 or like number 4, and it was a lot of like hype for him. You go and you look at the numbers, and you're like, all right, he had a pretty good statistical season this past year. And it was one of those things where it was very similar to kind of Cedric Tillman and Jalen Hyatt, where I'm like, a lot of this stuff doesn't translate very well. But once you get to this part of your rookie drafts in Dynasty, or the NFL draft, where you're talking about day 3 or round 3 for that matter in rookie drafts, you can take chances on guys like this. And what I like here is a guy that was able to show the production. He's got the good blend of the size and speed, length. He's actually pretty good at the contested catches. And for a guy who it wasn't a burner, he's pretty good at getting vertical separation downfield. And that was something that it was actually pretty impressive. I think that we don't hear this a lot with wide receivers. I think we hear it more with quarterbacks, but he's very raw. In terms of his ability. And he has that development that I think that if he ends up on the right team, like he's one of those that you put him in one of those teams, the Pittsburgh Steelers or something like that, where, man, like you could see this guy probably come on really at the end of his rookie season and be one of those guys we're talking about going into year 2. He's a good jump ball guy. He really extends out to catch passes pretty well. And one thing that you look for is, remember, I talked about spatial awareness, guys that make things easier for their quarterbacks. And at SMU, he knew that he was always the top target. He was always coming back to his quarterback. He was always a guy that was going to the open areas of the field. And that's something that I really like. I just think he's still super raw as a route runner. And I think because he's so good at the jump balls, he almost always just tries to do that. And he thinks that he can win. That was something that George Pickens kind of fell into in the NFL. And so you kind of want to see him get out of those bad habits at the next level.
Okay.
Yeah, I had heard even some were like surprised with that he was 6'1" because of what you're saying with his contested catches and kind of how big he plays. that when he actually measured in at 6'1", it was like, oh, this guy plays like he's more like 6'3", going on 6'4", because he's, just plays a little bit bigger than he actually measures. So yeah, he is very interesting. And I feel the same way as you, where I kind of feel like his name was a lot higher at different points to where now it's kind of dropped off a little bit, and I'm not exactly sure why. It's one of those funny things, and it's like no football's been played since then. So why is he falling so much for these months in March and April and so on? So
well, we definitely get in like our heads with some of these guys. Some guys that we have at the beginning of the process, they just tumble down, and perhaps there's just no really good reason other than we found another shiny toy to obsess over. So with that said, it's a decent opportunity for me to ask, is there another shiny toy in this draft for you outside of this top 10 group that sticks out that could be a real diamond in the rough?
Oh man, give me 1 sec. Let me look at my rankings. I don't have someone off the top of my head.
Okay.
Let me get you a guy. Hold on. Who did I like? You know what? Yeah, I think this guy's been getting a little bit of love, and I kind of enjoyed what he's able to do. He's super raw, and there's a lot of weird talk about him going in round 2, and it's Jonathan Mingo, the wide receiver for Ole Miss, and he's been getting so much love these past couple weeks. I'm like, all right, we gotta chill out with that. I don't know where all that talk is coming from. Apparently, it's very evident that he could go in round 2. Mm-hmm. I don't see that. I think he needs a lot of work coming out of Ole Miss, but he's one of those guys that you can't teach physicality, right? Like a guy either has it or he doesn't. He's really good at that. And once he gets the ball in his hands, I think he's probably one of the top 3 or 4 receivers in the run after catch department when it comes to what he does, to defenders. He needs to absolutely work on his hands. He absolutely needs to work on his route running. That's going to be, to me, like that's a day 3 guy. Like round 5, round 6, where you're taking shots on players, round 3, round 4 of your rookie drafts. But to see that he's being talked about as round 2 for the NFL draft, and round 2 or early round 3 of rookie drafts, I was like, all right, we need to slow down. But he's the guy that does really intrigue me because of that skill set.
Yeah. It seems like Ole Miss, there's something down there with these physical receivers that they produce, because he's got that like AJ Brown size where he's 6'2", 220.
Yep.
And dropped in another eagle there coincidentally. But yeah, it's interesting that he comes
DK.
out. Yeah,
DK.
DK's, the easy one there. I went more with the 226-2, the AJ Brown comp there. But yeah, there's something about the Ole Miss water down there just producing like physical receivers. So yeah, that's very interesting. I have seen a lot of buzz about him too. Round 2 would be really interesting.
It made me have to go back and look at the film and be like, what the heck is everyone else seeing? And I was like, all right, I get it. I'm still not there where everyone else is, but I get it. I see the.
I've seen a lot of uncomfortable comparisons to a really raw Deebo Samuel. So
stop.
I know. Again, the eye roll. I know. I had the same thing myself. But look, I'm not going to take up any more of your time. You have graced us for a full hour here. So why don't you go ahead and tell us where we can find all of your content?
Yeah, well, you can always follow me on Twitter at @thepretendgm, and then you can find all of my content and everything we're doing over at footballguys.com and on our Football Guys YouTube channel, where, as Sam said, I'm now the head of video content. So I'm going to be trying to get everything looking really good over there, have my thumbprint on our video content. And the Pretend GM goes on every Monday, so you'll be able to catch that on YouTube or in the audio version as well.
Yes, and the good looking host Joey Wright over there is always fun to watch as well.
He is a dreamboat.
yes, he is. Jay, what about you?
You can find me, on Twitter at JR's, just first and last name. Just doing our show every week and just trying to, get out all my draft stuff. Doing a lot of best ball drafts. That's, kind of where I'm living right now in these best ball lobbies. Trying to get some work done in some of the big tournaments this year. I'm hearing there's a rumor that Best Ball Mania 4 is going to start like right after the NFL draft. So that's going to be a lot for me with, that opening up with the rookie draft starting, all that kind of stuff. But I'm very excited. We're a couple weeks closer to the draft. And thank you again, Alfredo, for coming on. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely, guys. Anytime.
And with that said, don't forget to go to footballguys.com and pick up your absolutely free best ball guide that we have been working very hard on for the past couple of months. But that is going to be it for us tonight. As always, I am Sam Wagman, your host, and tune in next week. You can catch me and Jay bringing on our buddy Thor Nystrom from Fantasy Pros to talk all about this quarterback class. Have a good night, guys.